Transmissions jammed. Proximity coverage only. Backup activated. System rebooted.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 3 of Proximity Coverage. I'm your host Rogue Gold and I'm super glad that you could join me today to talk some Division. First off, I apologize that this episode did not release last weekend like I had originally planned for it to, but obviously the big bombshell news about Massive and their new Star Wars game kind of rocked everyone, and I just wanted to put a bit of a pause on things, just see what information we were going to get. Unfortunately, any such information has been pretty bare. We still don't really know what the future of this game's franchise holds. The majority of the Division's core developers from the last 5 years basically have been transferred over to Star Wars, and so it has yet to be seen whether the Division will somehow continue on for now, or it may perhaps be going into a hiatus. Now, that uncertainty does bring into question the future of this podcast that I just began, and unfortunately, it seems like it might have been a bad time to do so. Part of the whole reason why I wanted to create this series in the first place was to have an additional outlet to give my thoughts and feedback on different aspects of the game that could hopefully be used in some manner for, contributing to a bigger, brighter, and better future. Like I've said before the Star Wars news dropped, I was very certain we were getting a Division 3, and so this show seemed like the right thing to launch. But in all honesty, if it's announced that the franchise is going to die down for a while, I don't know how much interest I'd have in continuing. I'd have little motivation to talk extensively about the future if we were to find out that the future is a long way off, But I assume we won't get any definitive news or answers about that until at least February 10th, where I predict they might do a State of the Game the day after the Fame mission drops. So for now, I'll continue putting out these episodes and hope for the best going forward. That said, today's main topic, as was voted by you guys, is Expedition, so we'll dive into that in just a moment here. As a reminder, you can go vote on next week's topic right now in the community tab on my channel. There will be a poll right near the top and you can cast your vote on. Additionally, be sure to send in any and all questions you may have about the Division franchise that you want answered here on the show, as the second half of each of these episodes is dedicated to doing just that. You can send in questions in my YouTube comments, on Twitter, anywhere you can reach me. Just be sure to label the question as one you want answered on Proximity Coverage so I can address it accordingly. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Expeditions, what they could have been and what went wrong. So, when Expeditions were first announced, I think there was already a major expectation that was there for replayability, right? If they didn't bring some sort of replayability into that factor, then it was doomed to fail, because Underground, Survival, Last Stand to an extent, and Resistance were just, what we had in our minds, because that was all we knew about game modes, quote unquote, from the Division 1. I don't remember specifically if the devs labeled Expeditions as a game mode before they launched, but, because of what we knew and what we expected from the same DLC launch pattern from the Division 1, we were expecting this is going to be some sort of replayable mode type content. And obviously it didn't do that. So that was a bad start for it. And when they first announced Expeditions, I imagined some sort of slow-paced but interesting university exploration mode. I don't really know what I was expecting, but I thought it could be kind of cool. And I think that the college layout and landscape still could have been done better, sort of like an Old English style, kind of like they have in some of those ones in New England and the US or in the actual UK and Europe. And even though I like the environment and what we got at Kenley, I still think it could have been a little cooler if they had expanded upon it, if they had actually added more because what I originally imagined was you'd traverse these kind of cavernous and big hallways that you might find in some sort of it's not really a fair or good comparison, but think of Harry Potter, right? In those movies, what those kind of hallways look like. That's actually something you can find if you go to some of those older universities, and I was hoping that could have been kind of what Kenley would have been when they said it was going to be at a college. So to have those kinds of environments to go through and you explore different, corridors and hallways and classrooms and maybe big meeting halls. I don't know what they could have put in there. Like I said, I don't really know what I thought the objectives were going to be, but I thought it could have been kind of cool because they said they were going to unlock different wings of the college throughout the different weeks. I thought, okay, maybe at first you're going to start on the lower floors. You're going to go through all those hallways, fight some enemies, do some puzzles, whatever. And then maybe you'd, unlock a whole different wing and go in there. But it ended up being just 3 different completely different mission areas, right? I like the ones that we got. I mean, I enjoy the student library, certainly has a very unique and distinct theme and setting to go in there. It has the different library areas. It's got the common area and all that stuff. Then the student quarters, I think, was fine. The underground one was cool enough. It was a bit samey to some of the other locations we have in the game, but it was still interesting enough, but I still think it could have been a lot cooler if they made it more of that old English style of architecture. And I think there could have been, there was room for there to be something cool. I think with a bit of a slower paced, they just made it too similar to like a main mission, but then it was a boring main mission and it had no story. So it just didn't really have anything to grab onto. And I think there could have been a better job done there for sure. So that's what I thought about what we could get. But what did we get? Boring. Total boredom. Like, I would say the only good thing about the original Kenley launch was the Diamondback. And the promise of having an exotic at the end of the whole deal was, I think, the only reason why anyone even cared to go in and do the thing week after week. Because when it originally launched, you couldn't even play. I mean, I guess if you've never played it now, it's that way too. But you can't do them all at once. You have to do them wing by wing, week by week, and it was just not a good time. We didn't even really know if the Diamondback was going to be that good at the time. I don't even honestly remember if it was, but now I like the Diamondback a fair bit. So if anyone hasn't done it, I think Kenley is certainly worth doing it just for that exotic, because it's a fun and unique exotic. And so having that as a reward was good, but it certainly didn't make the actual content any better. And the fact that it was a guaranteed drop meant that there was no, replayability factor in terms of retrying it to get that reward. Although if they had done that, I'm sure that would have gone over terribly with how bad the content was. So, I think even something just like a bare bones, like Horde mode, like not even as fleshed out as Resistance was with all of its different, buying areas and all that stuff. I think if they just gave us like a bare bones, go in the student library, hold out against waves of outcasts, I feel like that would have been better than what we got, because what we got was just bleh. That's my memory of it. I haven't even done it in months because there's just no reason to. Why would I go back and do the time trials? That's just I don't even want to think about it, quite honestly. And I don't want to sound that negative. If someone who made this thing happened to be listening to this, I don't want to feel like it's that bad, but there was just it didn't bring anything unique to the game. Underground brought us new environments. It brought us a level of randomness that we didn't have in the game thus far. Survival completely redesigned the entire map and gave us a whole new experience, kind of similar to what we thought the original Division game might be like. Last Stand brought us a really awesome replayable PvP mode that had PvE elements in it, and Resistance was a super fleshed out Horde mode where you could actually unlock different parts of the map and get an exotic chest and all this kind of stuff. It was dope. And Kenley College and Expeditions, like I said, it's just like main missions, but without much of a story. And it's just didn't seem that cohesive. I don't really even remember what the story of it was, other than outcasts came and killed people, and now we're here, right? So I just didn't think the execution was there, quite honestly. So what do I think could have been done better? To be honest, I think it's, aside from the Nightmare event that was canceled, which we now know is a Resident Evil crossover, that would have been pretty cool to see zombies in there, I will say. As much as some people are against that idea, I think that it wouldn't have been a part of the overall lore. So I think it would have been a really fun event. But I think it's too far gone for there to be some sort of half-baked, rework of Kenley College. I think that if they wanted to make it better, they would have to totally go back to the drawing board. And so what I wanted to do now was present you guys with an idea that I had for Expeditions in general. I actually made a video on it a long time ago, back when I didn't have that many subscribers, so I don't think that many people watched it, but I wanted to revisit that and kind of pitch it to you guys today, because I think it could have actually been pretty cool. Now, keep in mind, basically the only thing I've kept in this idea of mine is the name and the theme of an expedition, but I believe it would have been better liked than what we got. But yeah, this is just totally me spitting my ideas out there. There's no basis to this. There's no connection to what we have. Like I said, it literally only keeps the name of the expedition, but it's not really similar to what we got whatsoever. So the idea is a mode that would have been PvE and PvP, kind of like survival. You can choose which one you want to do. And it also would have kept the theme of there being a convoy, because like I said, I don't even remember. Some part of Kenley, there's a convoy, right? Where you go in. I think the outcasts ambushed it, and that's why they're there now. I don't really know. But there was something about a convoy at Kenley, so I would have kept that too, is that the core goal of this mode is to escort a convoy truck through randomly generated suburbs of Washington, D.C. So yeah, we would have finally gotten actual neighborhoods. I think that's something that, when you read something like the book that was tied to Division 2, the descriptions of going through these neighborhoods and seeing these different communities that are around there, it sounds pretty cool. It sounds cool to go through rural America after the green poison is hit and see what that kind of looks like. So I think that was an opportunity they could have had to introduce that random generation of how the neighborhoods were laid out and what sort of houses you see. So that backdrop could have been really good for the randomly generated aspect that so many people were assuming and hoping and expecting was going to come with expeditions in the first place. So yeah, the goal was to escort a convoy truck through these randomly generated suburbs. And so along the way of escorting this convoy truck, you would get attacked and ambushed by random NPC factions and troops. And they could either just, full on rush your truck, or they maybe could lay traps and use different tactics. Like they could lay spikes down on the road that you have to identify and take out before your truck crosses it. Maybe there's some sort of influence you can choose into what slight direction the truck takes so you can avoid them, that type of stuff. And so it could have been a really dynamic and engaging thing where you're having to constantly be on the lookout, scan your surroundings, see if there's enemies hiding out somewhere, get ready for a full-on assault on your truck. It could have been really neat, I feel like. And like I said, it just could have been a really good thing to use the backdrop of random generation. Maybe you go through neighborhoods, you go past different parks that have lakes or whatever, you're just cruising along these neighborhood streets that twist and turn, and it could have been a cool environment too with like the nature. I just think it would have been a really cool backdrop. And so doing that type of mode in that type of setting, I feel like could have been a very replayable and fun thing to do. So in general, I feel like you would have gotten points for like defending your convoy, killing different enemy types and different sizes of ambushes and assaults, disarming these various traps that the enemies can maybe lay down, and maybe there's like boosts or power-ups that you could acquire similar to Last Stand, where you put your points into it, or you just go and find them and use them on the map, and that gives your convoy some sort of speed buffs or protection. And then the goal overall is to have a swift and efficient transport from point A to point B of where your convoy starts to where it's going to end, and not letting your convoy take, huge amounts of damage, or maybe you can heal it up in some fashion as you go along. That would have been the overall goal of the mode, this expedition mode and this convoy transport mode that I envisioned. And in that instance, it would have just been PvE, your team escorting up to 4 versus the AI that would have came out from around all different directions in the randomly generated areas. But I also think that they could have done a very interesting PvP mode with this that would have taken some inspiration, I suppose, from the Gambit mode in Destiny. If you don't know what that is, that's basically where two teams are competing, doing the same PvE activities, and it involves you get the opportunity to invade the other team's world and kind of halt and interrupt their progress. So what I could have seen that coming in for this mode is that in PvP, there could have been two teams that are going simultaneously on mirror tracks of whatever randomly generated area you're in, and maybe that's separated down the middle by some, forest or whatever. But at any time, so let's say, while these teams are going, you're racing for the win, right? Whatever team is going to get their convoy to the finish line first is going to win. But at the same time, you're dealing with the same NPC ambushes and attacks. And on top of that, you can also at any time send however many players you want to go ambush and assault the other team's convoy. They can run through this middle area to then, find themselves coming out on the other side of a mirror track of what they're doing, and they can then assault the other team's progress. Maybe you can open your map and see how far the other team is at any point, and that can kind of dictate whether or not you feel like it's time to go over and assault. Because while you can do that, you also need to stay and defend your own. So if you send 2 players off to attack the other team, then that leaves you 2 men down, and then you're standing there on your own convoy, and maybe then a huge assault of Outcast comes in, or whatever faction, and you're like, well, crap, now we're getting slowed down, but maybe we can also slow down them. So it'd become a really cool and engaging, activity. And a mind game of like how many, where are we going to allocate our resources to try and get us to the finish line as quickly as possible, but at the same time ensure that our enemy isn't going to do the same. So I feel like it could have been pretty cool. Again, it doesn't really keep any of the original ideas that, Kenley College and the Expeditions gave us. But again, I really have never seen anyone who liked it in the first place. So I feel like no one would really care if that would go away. But if it was to be the original thing in the first place, no one would know, right? All right, and I think that's going to do it for the main topic of the day, Expeditions. An interesting but certainly unliked and outdated relic of Division 2's Year 1, in my opinion. As always, let me know your thoughts about the topic as a whole and my thoughts on it in the comments below, and I hope that provided an engaging and insightful discussion on Expeditions and Kenley in general. Moving on, we come to the question submitted by all of you. So, let's just get right into it. And reminder, if you want to send any in for future weeks, be sure to do so and label it as a question for proximity coverage. Starting it off, we have Totkin from Twitter asking about PvP role balancing. When it comes to PvP, can you talk about the balance and differences of DPS, tank, and skill builds and how they should act versus how they do? So yeah, this is a great question because I've made it very clear in the past that I think one of the biggest issues facing this game, and especially PvP, is tanks. Because in theory, Massive wants, or I'm not going to say Massive because Red Storm does a lot of the PvP. Overall, whoever makes the PvP in this game clearly wants it to be some sort of rock, paper, scissors deal with DPS users, tank users, and skill users. And in theory, that's fine, and I'm cool with that. I think that's a fine idea for what this game is going for. But that's never how it's worked, or it's rarely how it's worked. Because most of the time, and I've said this in plenty of videos past because I think it's a really big issue, is that tank builds are able to get tanky, and they're able to get a lot of damage. And that inherently breaks that trinity that you're trying to go for, and that rock, paper, scissors that you're trying to go for, because then there's no question. Why would you go full glass cannon if you can go tank and get a lot of damage like you can now with, I don't even know what people use anymore because I don't really play PvP that much, but 6 blues, armor regen, a shield, Lady Death, Adrenaline Rush, Intimidate. It's just busted, and it's not fun. Like, people find that to be fun, and that's fine. But compared to, like, Division 1, and I'm not saying Division 1 was perfect. It had a lot of shitty balancing patches. But, like, the problem is that's what they're going for. But then the most fun patch in Division 1 for PvP for me was 1.7 when we had hybrid builds. And that's not even part of that rock, paper, scissors that they're going for. So if they really want that to work in the future in a potential Division 3, they really need to ensure that DPS users cannot be tanky and they cannot get a lot of healing. Tank users can be tanky and provide buffs to themselves and their team, but can't get damage and can't have good skills. And then skill users can have, very powerful skills that can aid themselves and their team, can't get damage, can't be tanky. That's as simple as that. And then in between, you have room for hybrid builds that hopefully have a place too, because that's always been my favorite, but I don't think those should be able to outshine what any full dedication in either of those 3 roles could be. And that's, like I said, that's always been their major issue. So thanks, Tot. That's a good question. It's certainly a big issue that the developers need to tackle in the future. Next up, we have one from Cashnix talking about how a fall theme setting could play out in the future of any Division game. And I think, yeah, certainly. While I've said that I would love for winter to return, I think fall is also a really great idea. And if they could have some sort of hybrid where it's, in some areas it's fall, and then maybe at some times you could see some light snowfall, I think that could be a really cool idea. He mentions in here, like, dark and stormy and rainy nights. I think, yeah, exactly. That would be a fantastic setting. Having, the trees be all different colors too, having a lot of leaves on the ground that can maybe blow around in the wind. I think that's certainly something that the possibilities in future of next gen and the upgrades to the Snowdrop engine that they've done could do, and I think that would really be a fantastic setting. So I would certainly be down for that, along with a full return to the winter time. Either of those would be really great in my book, because I think, great things could come of either of those settings for sure. So thanks for that one. Aaron Barton on Twitter asks, what are your thoughts on targeted loot? With the ability to change the targeted loot on the summit at any time, why would, you want to farm anywhere else? Should targeted loot maintain the way it is in Division 2 or be changed in some fashion for the Division 3? Yeah, so when it first was announced in TU6, I thought targeted loot was fantastic, and I still think it's a very good addition to the game, given how much RNG you can have in some of these different builds that people try to go for, right? The problem now is I think it's oversaturated. Like you said exactly in your question, when you can pick whatever you want in the summit, why would I ever want to go and farm one of these open world areas? And that's what I've, personally what I've experienced. I almost avoid certain areas because I don't want my loot to be oversaturated by Murakami, by pistols, by whatever. And so in Division 3, what I think would be a good alternative is to remove targeted loot from the open world and from missions and from all those kinds of activities. Have the return of a mode like the Summit, where you can even maybe customize your experience more so than you can now, where not only could you choose your targeted loot, but maybe you could put on different modifiers and directives that not only give you an XP boost and increased chance it drops targeted loot, but you could maybe specify your drops even more. So let's say overall there's a system like there is now where you can choose, what type of gear you want, whether it's ARs, chest pieces, whatever. And that's free. That's just how it works now. But then directives would allow you to say, on these different drops, I want there to be a guaranteed crit damage roll. Let's say if you're doing masks, for example. So you put on 1 or 2 directives, and that guarantees that you're going to have one roll that's at least crit damage. So maybe an experience like that, and it improved an enlarged summit for its vision. You could not only choose your targeted loot, but customize the experience further to, further guarantee what kind of drops you're going to get. I feel like that could be pretty cool. And while I would remove it from the open world, because I think at that point it just oversaturates it to the point where it's not unique, give the open world some sort of incentive on its own. Maybe the open world is one of the best places to get experience, or the best places to get, I don't know, but you get what I'm saying? Whereas if the summit is the best place for loot, okay, well then let's give the open world some sort of unique thing as well, so that you're not just detracting from that experience and not putting anything in its stead, right? The one exception is I would also like to see targeted loot return for the Dark Zone, because I think that has done really great things for Dark Zone popularity on certain days when you have these like cool things show up in the Dark Zone rotations. So I would certainly keep that. But what I might do is if they return to a single Dark Zone, which I would hope they do in a potential Division 3, I would have there be like 5 different selections of what kind of target loot you could have in the Dark Zone, so that people could go in and then choose between 5 selections. So let's say ARs, chess pieces, if we're just talking in terms of Division 2, Hunter's Fury, Murakami, and Golan are your 5 choices. So then anyone in the Dark Zone can choose any of those 5, so that then when you're going through and you're going rogue and you're killing people, you're seeing a little bit of a wider selection of what loot can drop, but at the same time you could still choose what you're going for, and that could make it a much more interesting experience and could still drive a lot of people to go in there, because like I said, I think that aspect to it has brought a lot of popularity and fun back to the Dark Zone. And what they could also do is have special weekends where you can choose exotics as your targeted loot in there, and that would just, drive Dark Zone numbers through the roof. And I would think it would create an awesome week-to-week experience where people are seeing what the Dark Zone has, do they want to go in there? I think it could be a really cool experience. So that was a great question. I think targeted loot has a place in this franchise, but I think some changes could be made to it to make it even better. So thank you, Aaron. That was a great one. Sneaky Stripes asks about what types of factions I might like to see in a Division 3. What about ones from a different country, he said. There's so many options they could do with that, but one faction or one, idea for a faction that I've always thought would be really cool that I thought what they were going to do in Division 2 with the Outcasts is have an actual cult, like a religious cult, some sort of thing in that realm, because they originally said that the Outcasts were going to be called the Lost or something, and I think they kind of pitched it like they were going to have some sort of religious intent, and maybe the Outcasts do, you could make that argument that they do, but they're more of just a bunch of crazies, right? They got quarantined on Roosevelt Island, and now they have a bloodlust to go and get revenge on anyone that did that to them, right? But I think if they actually had a faction that praised some sort of, higher deity beyond what the apocalypse has shown us in the Division, that could be really cool. And what my friend actually suggested once is that type of faction could have some sort of intent to where they want to have the second coming of the green poison, right? Maybe they think that the apocalypse was a blessing to the world, and then now they want that, a second wave of that to return, to decimate whoever's left. That could be a really cool idea for a faction, and so that's something that in a future game like the Division 3, I think could be really cool to see. So thanks for that one. Sneaky also asks about what sort of skills I think should return in the future or not, and what new ones. I think that certainly a lot of the skills in this game work very well, and that currently in TU12 we're at a pretty good spot with skills. So, there's a lot that I would want to return. Stuff like I think the Seeker Mine is super classic. Newer ones like the Decoy I think are great. The Sticky Bomb's a classic. I think the Hive was a really good addition to Division 2 over the original. So there's a lot of skills that I think they should certainly bring back, because there's no reason to replace stuff that already works well, right? But I do certainly want there to be some sort of burst healing skill to return. I think there are still more ones they could make. Off the top of my head, I don't really know what they would be, but I think certainly a mix of old and new is the right solution. So I think they did well with that in Division 2, but their original vision for skills in this game wasn't the best. So I think that's why it didn't work out the best originally, but there's certainly room for improvement in that department in the future. So that's what I would personally like to see. Next up, Anders asks about there being a more in-depth modding system similar to something like Warframe or Path of Exile. And yeah, I I haven't gone far enough in Warframe to ever really engage with that system a ton, so I can't tell you from experience what that's like. But I know that they have something like that, and I've read about how, or watched videos about how Path of Exile has that as well. So certainly I'd be up to anything that increases our ability to customize our build and our character. One thing that Mutant Cowboy is a YouTuber, a Division 2 YouTuber, who made a video about this a long time ago, about how it would be cool if the game could treat almost any item you have as a skill. So whether it's a gun, a grenade, a medkit, a gear piece, whatever, or an actual skill could be treated as a skill, and then it has its own unique upgrade system and skill path to follow there. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, and while it would be a lot of work for the devs, I think it could be pretty cool. Again, that would be hard to do with PvP and all that, but yeah, anything that allows us to, further increase the customization and the build potential and the diversity is something I'll always advocate for. So I think that'd be really cool. Thanks for that one. All right, X Enzia, hope I said that right. I know I asked you for clarification before. Asked a bunch of questions, and some of yours I'm going to save for a future one, but there are two that I picked out here that I wanted to answer here. The first is, he's asking about, should high-end blueprints from the Dark Zone return like it was in Div 1 in the first year? Where you get the currency by engaging with Dark Zone systems? Certainly. I really like that, and I think as much as people hate the Dark Zone, sadly, and I think that they don't really want that kind of system to return, anything that increases the individuality and the uniqueness of the Dark Zone experience in its own unique loop is something that I will always, want to see return. So something like that, where you could get some really cool blueprints, would be really cool. But a way they can make it balanced to not just needlessly upset people who don't play the Dark Zone or PvP is have an option to get those in PvE as well. But similar to the Dark Zone, make it a difficult challenge to get the experience and currency you need to get it in the PvE world, right? So that there's challenging ways on both sides to get these same unique and powerful rewards, I think would be a really good system. And then second question here, asking about first-person implementation, which is certainly an interesting prospect. I personally would not care to see that because I actually really love that Division is third-person. I really love third-person games. I'm not opposed to first-person games. I mean, I've played plenty of COD and Destiny, but there's always something I've liked about third person. I like being able to see my character because I think that makes the customization more interesting. And I just like that gameplay style overall. So I wouldn't personally like to see that, but I'm sure you'd find a lot of people who would not mind that for the Division. And I'm sure, some PvP enthusiasts would love that for the Dark Zone. But yeah, personally, I love third person, so I would prefer for it to stick that way. But I'm sure that's an idea that you could, get some traction on if you were so inclined to do so. So thanks for that one. And last up, the one I wanted to save for last here is a return to one that Sneaky asked, so thank you for all your questions, man. Your continued questions, I should say, over the weeks. Should we get special cinematic moments for top-tier boss kills like during main missions in Division 3? And this is something that I thought was really interesting to talk about, because the idea of a more cinematic story is something that I'm certainly very interested in, and that I hope they could do. I've proposed before that perhaps the Division 3's main campaign and storyline should be entirely single player, and that it only becomes a looter shooter and that type of game once you hit the end game. And I think that if they were to do something like that, that leaves a lot of room for a more cinematic and engaging story, both with the boss kills, but also when you go back to the base, we get very few cinematics in Division 2 and Division's current story. And so I think more of that certainly couldn't hurt, and it could only increase how interesting and how engaging the story is. So both for the enemies and for the allies, I would love to see more of a backstory and more, cutscenes with a cinematic vibe to give you a more fleshed out story. So certainly I would like to see that, and hopefully that's something the devs might contemplate and consider for the future. Alright, and with that, we close out episode 3 of Proximity Coverage. Thank you all so much for joining me, and a big thanks to everyone who submitted questions for this week. I have a few more saved up, but I can always use more, so be sure to send in anything Division related that you guys want me to answer on here. It's always a lot of fun, so certainly don't be shy. Reminder also to go vote on next week's topic right now. I think it should be an interesting bunch for you all to choose from. And yeah, guys, for now the show goes on, and I will continue doing these episodes unless we get some sort of catastrophic news, in which case I certainly will do, I think, an episode just dedicated to chatting about that unfortunate end if it comes to that, but I'll choose to not linger on that for now, and let's all hope for the best, and hope that in a few weeks' time, we can all look back and say that we were all being a bit paranoid. Thanks so much for your time and support, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until the next time, Rogue Gold, out.